All right, everybody, welcome back. We're going to get our next speaker up here for you. Sarah Young is our next speaker. She's an Azure Security Architect. She's based in Melbourne, but travels all over speaking at conferences and helping her customers secure their cloud environments and so forth. So we're going to bring Sarah in here and let her get started with her presentation. Sarah, with that, it is all yours.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I hope you're all having a good day or evening, no matter where you are in the world. Thank you for joining me today. Today I'm going to talk to you about security operations in a cloud-native environment. And yeah, the tagline is "Collection is not detection," because it's a fun little, it's rhymes, and I have a sticker of it, which I'll show you later, and it's very cute. But just real quick, obviously, I've just been introduced, but who am I? I'm an Azure Security Architect. I live in Melbourne, which is the colder and wetter bit of Australia, but I'm actually currently in New Zealand. So yeah, thanks COVID and border closures for that. At some point, I believe I'll get to go back to Australia. I really love dogs. That dog on the picture there is not me. It is not mine. It is my parents'. I live vicariously through her. One day when I don't travel, I'll definitely get one. In a prior life, I used to be a network and a VoIP engineer, and now I do all kinds of cloud security stuff, including, of course, security operations. I'm a prolific user of GIFs or GIFs. We're not even going there during this. We're not going there. Whatever you want to call them is fine by me. And memes in my presentations, if they're a little bit obscure, I'll probably explain them. It depends if you have my sense of humor. But if you've ever seen one of my presentations before, you probably already know that. But what am I actually talking about today? I want to talk about security operations, because we talk about DevSecOps. And we talk about, and lots of people talk about putting security into development, which of course is really important. And I myself have talked on that subject many times before. But we need to look, we sometimes forget that we also aren't going to get rid of what would more traditional security operations. So I'm going to look at why those types of security operations are important. Give you a recap of just how we looked at that stuff on premise or kind of in our traditional environment. What, who, how, when, how do we actually do this? And then I'm going to talk, lastly, about use cases. We really need to talk about use cases, let me tell you. Now, on the right there, if you're not familiar with that dog is called Tofu. He lives in Melbourne. He's a really cute Shiba, and he does feel-good motivational videos. If you need something to cheer you up, I definitely recommend you go check him out on YouTube. I'm not sponsored by him in any way, shape, or form. I just think he's adorable. And he recently did a video where he was hacking, so I had to add it in to my talk. So, might sound like a stupid question to anyone who already works in security, and any of you who are probably listening to this presentation, you probably at least have a vested interest or do security yourself. So maybe saying, why is security operations important, seems like a stupid question, but there's a reason I wanted to cover that at the beginning of this talk. Just before we go any further, I think sometimes there's a lot of misinformation about what security operations does. Now, you've probably seen many forms of this meme before. I couldn't find a specific security operations one, so I went for this general InfoSec one. As you know, what my parents think I do, I'm a hacker. What users think I do, just break things. What society thinks I do, it's a guy with a balaclava, of course. What IT managers think I do, just burn money. And what I actually do is probably sit around and work with my colleagues. Granted, in the current state of the world, we're doing that remotely, not in person. But I think that the important point here is that there is, I think, a fundamental misconception about what security operations is for sometimes. And as I was saying at the beginning, when we're moving into DevSecOps and shifting right and using all those buzzwords, we still do need that incident response and security monitoring side of things, albeit it might be done a little bit differently. I do keep meaning to make a security operations one, because I couldn't find one on Google. If anyone finds one, please tell me, because I would love to see it. But look, here are some, I mean, I've just picked some random random articles here. In fact, most of this was containers and Kubernetes stuff. But why should you care? Because we know that there are breaches happening all the time. You know, we say now you should assume breach. You shouldn't just if you don't think you've been breached, the chances are you have been breached, but you just don't know about it. So, you know, why should you care? Every organization, no matter whether you're big or small or whatever you do, you need to care about security operations, because you will have been owned, or your users will have been owned in some way, shape, or form. I mean, I just picked these ones randomly off the internet when I was making the slide, but, you know, I know that every single one of you will be able to think of a high-profile breach that's happened. And of course, at the moment, in the current environment, we're seeing more breaches, things around, or we're seeing people use tactics around COVID and things like that. So whenever we find a way to mitigate a certain type of attack, attackers are developing and changing their methods, or they're altering them to adapt to what's going on in the world. As I said, there's a lot of COVID related scams and threats going around at the moment. I know personally, and you can, I'm not sure what you've experienced yourself. I know personally, I've had many COVID related phishing type emails offering me PPE and hand sanitizer and things like that. And I'm pretty sure they're not legitimate websites. But again, they use these things to play into people's fears. So security operations is still really important. And of course, now with more people working from home, when that security operations is becoming even more distributed, as in, you know, we are an organization's security operations are starting to lead to sort of work its way into people's homes as well, when we used to be quite office focused. So there's so many different things here, and this shouldn't be anything new to you, but I think sometimes we sometimes we need to refocus on it a little bit. This is from Microsoft Security Threat Intel. It's just to give you an idea of what the kind of attack surface at the moment. So these prices are in US dollars. You can see, and it just gives you an idea of actually how inexpensive it is to attack people. So you don't necessarily need to be a state-sponsored actor. You don't have to be a huge, large criminal syndicate. You know, it is relatively cheap to go on the dark web, procure tools, and run attacks. So an exploit kit, you know, maybe about $1,400 a month. 0 days. Now, a lot of people are worried about 0 days, and rightly so, because 0 days have no mitigation, or at least initially they don't have any mitigation. But in fact, the cost to develop one, it goes from about $50,000 up to, I don't know, 3.5 million. So there's only particular types of attackers that can actually have the resource and the money to develop those. But if you look at things like ransomware, that only costs $66 up front. And strange phrasing, I know, you can basically get ransomware as a service, which means that you can go on the dark web and pay someone to do the ransomware for you, and then they effectively clip the ticket and take some of your profit. If we keep going around there, you can see DDoS costs just under $800 a month. Compromised accounts, of course, are very cheap. And will, you know, if you've ever looked at a website called Have I Been Pwned, and put your email in, no doubt one of your emails that you use in your everyday life will have been in some kind of breach. And if you use the same username and password, both in any more than one place, and it's compromised in one place, then basically your username and password combination is out on the dark web for someone to buy and potentially use. Now, if we were all in person, I would be asking if anybody wanted to admit that they use the same username and password combination in real life. Obviously, I can't do that, but I'm pretty sure that most of you have done that at some point during your lives. Hopefully, you're all getting rid of it now, because you're all good, responsible security professionals. But again, the point here is just to see, like, it doesn't take much. And you may know as well, I only discovered this recently, that if you, a really common attack by teenagers is when they're playing online gaming systems. There are DDoS solutions that cost like a couple of dollars, and they go and DDoS their rivals in Fortnite or whatever it is, Call of Duty, etc. So, you know, the environment is so easy. It's so easy to get attacked. So this is why, you know, we really need to be concerned, and not just about the big scary 0 days. Like, it's the more common attacks which actually are, you know, more prevalent in the environment. So typical security operations issues. These, again, are not new. Too many disconnected products. Many people will say to you, this is a single pane of glass. You can just do everything from this one console. That's very rarely true. It's very difficult to have all your different products talk to each other, especially if you're running a large, complex enterprise environment and you have lots of different vendors. Not enough SOC analysts. Now, that, again, it doesn't matter on the size of your organization, whether you're big or small. Well-trained SOC analysts are hard to come by. And so whether you're a big organization that needs 100 or you're a smaller organization that needs 5, it can still be hard to actually fill those seats, which of course means that the load on your other SOC analysts is increased. Environments are definitely getting more complex. I mean, if you're looking at moving to the cloud, most businesses are not 100% cloud, even Microsoft isn't. So you've often got a hybrid environment where you'll have some on-premise, you have something in the cloud, you may even have more things in the cloud as well, or in a different cloud. So environments are getting more and more complex, and to maintain monitoring and visibility over that is a real challenge. Most SOCs also depend on manual processes. Now, going forward, it's great. We've got automation, which I will talk about later. But, you know, a lot of SOCs, if you've ever worked in a SOC, you probably know that there are some quite time-consuming manual processes that they have to do to correlate things or try and verify false positives, etc. And that can be really time-consuming. And combined with not enough staff, it can mean that a lot of alerts go unanswered or unaddressed. Some recent research, and I forget the source, so I apologize to the source that I read this from, but something like 45% of SOC alerts are never acknowledged, typically, which is actually quite a lot. And again, this is just because of the being able to scale thing. And lastly, too many alerts. You know, we get false positives in security operations. You're always going to get false positives. The idea is to reduce them as much as you can, but you're never going to completely eliminate the risk that a false positive is going to occur, and your SOC analysts, of which you don't have many of anyway, will spend far too long looking at something that turns out to not be an issue. And, you know, this is kind of a circle that goes around. And these issues still exist in the modern environment too, but they haven't really changed. So how we can address them has changed, but generally the actual problems are still the same. I think my Simpsons gif is fairly obvious there. I have to talk about single pane of glass. Many people talk about single pane of glass. In my time in security, it is pretty difficult to get there. It's not impossible, but it is very, very challenging. I think most businesses realistically should aim for maybe as few panes of glass as possible. It's certainly not practical for a SOC analyst to look through, I don't know, 10, 15 portals. And I have seen things like that. And you should be trying to reduce it maybe to 2 or 3. And if you can get to 1, perfect. But I just sort of have to kind of shatter the single pane of glass thing, because it's very difficult to achieve. And if anybody has, and you want to tell me about it at the end, I would love to hear, because well done you if you've done it. But my point is, don't beat yourself up if you can't get there immediately, or even if you never quite get there, because, you know, it's very tricky. It really is. It's an ideal state that, yeah, not many can get to. Another problem is silos. and this is, again, a problem that's wider than just in security operations, but as my talk is about security operations, what we find is an attacker isn't going to just look at one particular part of your organization. So if you've got your Wintel team, if you've got your identity team, if you've got your cloud team, that's great. But if someone breaches your environment, like, they're not going to look through, they're not just going to stay in your little silo that fits with your organizational structure. And it can make security operations people, it can make their job very difficult. I don't know, this is what came up on Giphy for silos. I thought it was quite funny, but I think it's the US team, Olympics team for something. Beg your pardon, US team. I don't know, can't remember specifically what you were. But, you know, we can see here that an attacker will go across all of these different silos, and they don't care. You know, I have a sticker which I should have got out onto my desk right now, so I could have put it up to the camera. If you follow me on Twitter, you may have seen it before. Anyway, it says, "That's out of scope, said no attacker ever." Because unlike a pen tester or unlike anything else, you know, an attacker is just going to go through your environment and take and destroy or infiltrate whatever they can. Like, they don't care. So these silos, they're not great from an organizational and operational perspective anyway, but they really, really do not help security operations, because an attacker is just going to go across the whole thing. And if your security operations is put into different silos as well, that can be really, really difficult, because if you can only look at your identity, if you can only look at your endpoint, if you can only look at your applications, you can't correlate what's going on. So it's really, really important that we try and get rid of this. And this is a hallmark of traditional security operations, that this was often a very big challenge. So, by the way, if anybody wants stickers, feel free. I'm going to show you some more pictures coming up. Feel free to DM me on Twitter. New Zealand has post offices open, and I'm always happy to cheer someone up by sending you some security stickers. But how did we do security operations on premise then? So this is the really, really cheesy analogy, but it still holds true even today, which is the castle and the big walls and the moat. So when we did security operations on premise, we were very focused on taking information from the network, particularly the external perimeter. So firewalls, anything that was in the DMZ, etc. And a lot of our detections and how we picked up strange behavior was based on the network. But again, inherently, the problem with this model, of course, is that if the attackers did manage to breach the perimeter and say got in undetected, there wasn't nearly as much detection and logging like within the environment itself. So that potentially was a gap. And like I said, I have talked about this analogy to death in other talks, and I'm sure you've heard the castle moat analogy, but we do need to remember that although taking from the network is important, I'd never tell anyone to not take from it. There's still a lot of value that you can get from logging certain types of network events. You know, we do need to be looking at detection at all layers of the stack going forward. So the other thing that we also used to be very big on, and this still does, this mindset is still around today as well, is coming back to the title of my presentation, is collection is not detection. Now, certainly the traditional mindset for security operations was collect all the things. Every single log you could get, collect it, put it in your SIEM. But we know that a lot of these logs, no one ever ran detections on them, nor did they do proactive hunting on them. And then really, if you're not doing any of those things, is it really worth collecting them? Now, obviously, that is an individual business's final decision to make themselves. But I would always say to you, if you're looking at your security operations, like look at the types of logs you're collecting. Are you actually doing anything with them? Because if you're not, you know, why are you collecting them? Or at least why are you putting them into a seam? Because if it's going in a seam, if it's on-prem, of course, an on-prem seam will eventually run out of space and it degrades the performance as it gets over full. And if you're using a cloud-based seam, then of course you're typically paying per gig or whatever ingestion charge. So you'll be spending more money, but not really getting anything out of it. So, you know, definitely, please rethink your collection strategy. Don't just put things in for the sake of it. Again, if we were in person, I would happily have given everyone one of these stickers. Again, if you want one, DM me on Twitter. I'm sure I can sort you out. And as you can see, essentially, as per the cat lady, we don't want to be crazy hoarders and just have, well, this lady has millions of cats, but you know, we don't want to just spend money and hoard lots and lots and lots of logs. Don't ask me why I went for cats and logs. Basically, if I run out of ideas, I typically go for cats. So yeah, there's cat lady. So next, let's talk a little bit about, I've basically talked about the problems that we have, the challenges, and how we used to do it, but what should we do going forward? So when you're doing your modern SecOps, you've basically got a choice. Assuming the, you know, most organizations now are looking at least moving some of their workloads into a cloud environment, you've got to kind of make a choice how you want to sort of have a focus for your modern SecOps. You could go fully cloud. You could do hybrid, so you could have some of your security operations done with on-prem systems, some of it done in the cloud, or you could still stay completely on-prem. And for that number two, the hybrid, that could be like an interim stay, or it could be something that stays permanently. To be honest with you, a lot of businesses, if you've got an on-prem seam that you've spent a lot of money, invested a lot of time in, I wouldn't expect anybody to just say, right, we're getting rid of that tomorrow. I don't think that's really realistic. But certainly, if you're doing, as many businesses are and organizations are now, doing a cloud first journey, then it does make sense to, as your workloads go into a cloud, they would be connected up to a cloud-based seam and cloud-based monitoring tools. And then probably in time, you might want to phase out the on-premise stuff. But again, I can't tell you, you know, there's such a wide range of businesses and industries in the world. What you need to do there is going to really depend on your business. But I guess all I'm saying is make a conscious choice about what you're going to do, because what we often find as well is that it can be harder. Cloud, and I've worked with a number of different clouds. Getting cloud logs into an on-premise seam. Again, I'm not even naming particular platforms here. There's no need, because it seems to be a very general rule. It can be quite challenging to get them in and get them being processed. Again, that's more of like a legacy technology and a more modern technology compatibility thing more than anything. So please, like, at least think about what you're doing in this space. And yeah, what should you collect? Because I know I've just told you, you know, please don't collect everything. Be mindful of what you're collecting. But really what I'm saying here is you need to collect logs from your entire application stack. So don't just, not just your infrastructure. If you're using like containers, Kubernetes, not just your orchestrator, not the pods, not just the application. This is still going towards defense in depth. So having detections and protections at every layer of the stack. So that's your identity, it's your virtual machine, it's your application, it's down at the physical layer, it's down at the network layer. And when we're moving into these hybrid environments, some of this might be done by a cloud provider as well. So I guess it's more about mapping that out and understanding. And every time you can take a log, you know, ask yourself, what will we do with this log? What is it? What detections can we actually configure on it? Or what, if we wanted to do hunting through the environment, what could we find using these logs? Because make sure the log has value, otherwise you probably don't need to add it. So then looking at, by the way, this, I just realized I didn't explain this. This is what I got for hoarding, another hoarding GIF. They're hoarding GIFs. Apparently, you do not get very many of them on Giphy. So there you go. Who? So, you know, I've talked about this in other presentations before I've done about moving to cloud and modernizing your security, but you need to look at relook at the security tools that you may be already ingesting security visibility or security logs from. You know, will they get you the visibility you need in the cloud and in your hybrid environment? So when I talk about security operations and visibility tools, like we're talking about things like vulnerability scanning. Of course, I've talked a lot about SIEM already, runtime security, auditing, policy tools, image repositories. All of these things will generate logs that could be of use. But you need to make sure that they're actually giving you the visibility you need. You basically need to, some tools that you've used on premise will probably be fine, or they may just need an add-on. Some of them you may need to change altogether. Again, I can't give you specific guidance. I can't sort of concretely tell you what you do and don't need. It's very much going to be context dependent, but the idea is that I'm just giving you some things to think about. And last thing, today is definitely not the day to talk about paid versus OSS open source tools, because that is a big topic in itself. You can get some great open source tools out there, but again, whether or not they do what you need, typically they may need a bit more maintenance or engineering work to be able to use them. This is probably not the day for that, but again, just have these as points, you know, the kind of things you should be looking at when you're assessing what you want to do. And then when should you be doing security operations? This should be obvious, but the only reason I picked this was because of the little dude who I forget his name shouting, you should be doing it all the time. So, you know, you need to be doing security operations throughout your entire life cycle. Now, this is getting more back into the DevSecOps side of things, but from integrating security into development, which is great, that information that you're building and that visibility you're giving should be being fed into your security operations team. So from creating something to storing it, to deploying it, to its runtime and then tear down, we should be able to see all of those things because attackers are always finding new ways to do things. So if you don't understand what's going on in your environment, you can't possibly understand what's normal. And if you don't understand what's normal, you can't start to understand what's abnormal. Now, this is a huge task, and it's really easy for me to sit here talking to my laptop on my webcam, telling you, I know I've worked in internal security teams. This is a huge challenge, but at least, you know, start, and it's a journey for everybody, but at least, you know, by having these talking points and starting to think about it, you can start to move your way there. So the last thing I want to talk about is use cases. Now, I've got a thing at the moment about writing clickbait titles. So if you want your top security operations hack from me, understand your use cases. Now, the only bullet point I've put, as you can see 3 times, is understand your use cases. And the reason for this is I can't stress enough how important this is. You can definitely get detections and typical use cases in a general, you know, anybody who uses cloud or anybody who uses a certain type of product. A lot of vendors might suggest some recommended detections and use cases, but you know, every business's use case will be different. And in order to do proper assessments, if you're starting to modernize your SecOps, if you don't understand your use cases, it's going to be really difficult to justify what you're doing. So if I give you an example, so say you're a business and you need to know, I don't know, if you need to know that, you know, that all your users, because this is quite relevant at the moment, if any of your users log in the country that they're currently not, try and log in to your corporate environment from a place where they don't normally work. Because of course, at the moment, we wouldn't expect to see employees probably moving around the world very much. Now, if that's something that you need in your business, then of course, then you know how to write your detection. You can say, hey, we want a rule that says if somebody logs in outside of their standard country, we want to raise that as a security issue. Now, then you can work back from your use case and say, okay, in order to build this detection, what logs do I need? How do I do that? And of course, you can start relating it as well to MITRE ATT&CK tactics, etc. And of course, moving further up the chain, if you need to justify new tools, or you need to justify why you need to ingest certain logs or take certain log sources or get some more visibility, being able to do this mapping and explaining is so important from a management perspective, because you can say, I need this, and this is why I need it. It helps address these kind of attacks, and we need this specifically for our environment because of X, Y, Z. And you've got full traceability and mapping. And this not very many businesses do this. It sounds really basic, but not a lot of businesses do this and understand their use cases. And whilst it's a time-consuming operation, I'm not denying that at all. It is so valuable and will make a lot of these things that I've talked about and starting these activities so much easier if you do it. So I can't stress enough, please understand your use cases. Please. It will make me very happy. So in conclusion then, I've only scratched the surface of this topic, right? This is a huge thing. I do talk to customers and people I work with about this all day, every day. And, I've only got 35 minutes to talk to you about it. But, in conclusion, obviously we couldn't do a security operations talk without having everyone's favorite security related, this is fine, GIF in here. But, security operations is really hard. It's always been really hard. We have some great tools in the modern environment going into sort and automating things and being able to really get the false positive rate much better. But in order to do that, people need to understand their environments, which of course is the tricky thing because our environments are getting way more complicated. So, I can't even profess to say I've barely even scratched the surface of this topic right now because it's so difficult. But it's a journey for everyone. Please think about, especially when you're starting to transform your infrastructure, transform your enterprise environment, don't forget SecOps. People do. That needs to be looked at as well. And obviously there's a ton of resources online. Obviously feel free to hit me up directly on Twitter or whatever. It's one of my favorite topics. And I'm going to leave it there and see if you have any questions because, like I said, could go on about this forever, but I'm conscious of time. So thank you for having me, DevSecCon. It's been a pleasure. For those of you who are listening, I really hope you enjoyed it and that was useful and it gave you some things to think about. And yeah, that's me. And thanks very much. I'm not sure if people will talk for questions or they're in the chat window. Or if
I think Alyssa's audio is gone. That's why you can't hear her. Oh, there she is. She's back.
Oh, hello.
I apologize. I'm sitting here talking to myself. Gosh, this is as bad as like a Zoom. Let me try that again. So everyone else can hear. To what extent can we trust SOAR tools to help address these concerns?
Oh, so SOAR tools are really good. SOAR tools, this is, I think the hardest thing about SecOps is that we can't, well, it's the same in security, right? Nothing's 100%. SOAR tools can, SOAR tools can massively reduce your workload. So, but they're only going to reduce your workload for standard things that you can say write some automation for. So if you've got an alert that pops up in your environment that you know is benign, you can clear it out with automation. Or if it's just an error that needs fixing and you see it time and time again, SOAR is great for getting rid of repeatable things. But the more complex things that are obviously going to come up, at least from time to time, I don't think we'll ever get to the point where we can get that we're going to completely remove humans from it. So I know some people sometimes get scared thinking SOAR is going to like completely get rid of the people out of SecOps. I don't believe that at all. It's just going to stop people. Well implemented SOAR should just make security analysts, SOC analysts' lives easier, because they won't have to deal with the monotonous manual stuff, and it can also help just make their jobs easier. So for things that might be a little bit more complicated, you could still have some automation to do the repeatable tasks, like fetch IP, fetch more information from other places. And so they can concentrate on the stuff that's actually interesting and different. So I think SOAR is great, and I would definitely encourage you to use it, because it's not gonna get rid of people. It's just gonna make people's lives who work in security operations more interesting, I think. That's my opinion anyway.
Awesome. Well, you actually touched on the answer to another question that we had. So, I'm going to send you a different one then. This one comes from Megan. Her question has to do with talking to leadership within an org. Can you provide any tried and true strategies to start improving SecOps?
Oh, tried and true. I mean, the obvious tried and true one, of course, I'm sure you know, is usually if a company gets breached, they normally have a lot more focus on SecOps. But of course, that's not, and this has been, the eternal security person struggle. Of course, it's a bit late then, if you've already been breached. I think nowadays that conversation is definitely becoming easier, just by merit of the fact that security breaches, large-scale security breaches, have happened to many big name companies out there, and it's all hit, and lots of it's hit the media, and executives and leadership can see the negative impact that has, whether it's in terms of your share price or your customer confidence, etc. So I don't think it's as a harder discussion as it used to be, but I definitely think specifically for security operations, you, as I was talking about in the use cases, and again, this might be a little bit too in-depth for high-level leadership, but certainly using real-world cases and illustrating what's happened in terms of the loss of revenue or the loss of customer confidence, etc., is really helpful. But also just explaining, it's always difficult when it's leadership, but I think always going back to that reputational, ultimately businesses exist, most organizations exist to commercial organizations exist to make money. Maybe if you're government, obviously you don't want, you need the public to trust you. So I think it's an easier conversation than it was, but I think certainly showing, and an interesting one now is looking at some companies, not all, are now being more open about their breaches. Microsoft worked with a company in Scandinavia. They were very open about a breach that happened, and we helped them resolve that. And this is all public. And I think like helping leadership see those and see all the effort that goes into having to remediate it in terms of the time, the money, is a good way to position saying, hey, we should try and stop this happening in the first place, or at least minimize it, which is why we need to invest in our security operations. And there are definitely other companies out there. It's still not the norm. I'm hoping it will become more normal, that companies who have been completely owned are actually sharing their stories publicly and being much more open. And I think that'll be great if that continues, because it's going to help people realize how prevalent this is. Because of course, at the moment, if you get breached, a lot of businesses and organizations don't really want to talk about it. So some leadership will still think it's not a problem. I think we largely got past the "this won't happen to us" mentality, but maybe not quite yet. That was a very long answer, so
that's all right. So we had another question comes from Taj. Taj asks, how can you go about making a decision on what to log?
Oh, if I had a magic wand for that, or if I had $1 for every time people ask me that, it's really difficult, right? It's, and this is why there is no one, there's no one like definitive source that says if you log all of these things, you'll be fine, because it's impossible to create that, because each business has different things. What I would recommend you do is, particularly if you're using cloud, all of your infrastructure providers will often give you guidance about the kind of things you should log. They say maybe as a bare minimum, we'd start with this. Certainly, I know no vendor's going to give you, like, again, they're not going to categorically say you must do this, don't bother doing this. No one will ever do that because they can't. But certainly, take recommendations from whoever, your vendors for your tools, your infrastructure, your platforms. But then again, then I would say go back to your use cases. What are the biggest threats in your organization, or what does your organization consider the biggest risks? And from that, you can say, okay, so it might be you have like 10 critical applications. So for those 10 critical applications, you might want to log everything they do. Everything, because they are so critical, whereas for other ones you might not need to be so prescriptive. But yeah, it's a really difficult, time-consuming process, and I think it's one of those things that businesses struggle with, because it's time consuming and you need to understand the business and everything's changing. So I think, again, cheesy, I know, but it's a journey. But I think taking those bare minimums, recommendations from your vendors, and then talking to your technology risk people and doing that threat modeling and understanding, what would have the biggest impact if this part of the enterprise got owned, which part would have the most impact on the business negatively? Maybe you want to prioritize that. I think that's the best way to go about it, but it's certainly very challenging, I know.
Okay. Well, thank you, Sarah. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. There's a few more questions that people were asking. I don't know if you have a chance to pop in the chat after this, maybe.
Yeah, I'll pop in the chat, no problem.
Yeah, otherwise, hopefully they can find you on Twitter or something as well and ask their questions there. But yeah, terrific presentation. Really appreciate it. And thank you so much for being a part of it tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Have a good rest of your day or evening, everyone.
All right, take care.
Thanks.
All right, and with that, folks, we're going to take a really short break while we turn over speakers. So we'll be back in about 5 minutes.